Hi, I'm Howie and I'm here to give you a quick introduction to the Scrum framework. So, as with all things, let's start at the beginning. And the beginning of Scrum really starts with something we now call the product goal. And this is really the big definition about what it is we're trying to achieve here. So it could be that we're trying to develop an app to help dog wardens, for example, in a local authority, or it could be generating a next generation jet fighter. It's the big idea. And immediately that then introduces us to another really important concept for us, which we start to get into the accountabilities of Scrum as well. Because the person who's responsible for looking after this product goal is the product owner. And their role is pretty complex in that they've got a lot of stakeholders to manage, often quite a lot of conflicting views. But right at the beginning, the most important thing is to actually discover what's really needed to bring this product goal to life. And by working with this range of stakeholders, what they're going to create is what we call a product backlog, which is pretty simple to describe, but quite hard to actually keep as a live document. There's a lot of conflicting priorities often going on. So our product backlog is, you see it as an evolving and kind of ever-changing list, if you like, of the things that we want to achieve, the individual deliverables, right, that will make up and take us on a journey towards our overarching product goal. Now, in many ways, looking at this from an outsider's perspective, you think, oh, it just seems a lot like a requirements catalogue. But the important thing is how emergent this is. So although before starting sprinting, we'll take a good stab at it, we fully expect it to change. So stuff that might have been important before and is maybe right at the top here might end up dropping down a bit later, or indeed we might discover something completely new, right? And consider where's the right place to put this within the product goal. And all of this, bear in mind, is happening before we even start with Sprint 1 at all. Okay. So let's talk about how we then start to make this a reality. And the sprint is our container, if you like, for all the steps that will help the Scrum team move from this big list of things that we think are add value to actually deliver the product. So start at the beginning of that as well. The first event within the sprint is something that we call sprint planning. And not always the case in Scrum, but this one actually does what it says on the tin. So this is where the entire Scrum team, we'll define what that is in just a second, you get together and think about, okay, what can we actually achieve in the next sprint? A period typically of 2 weeks, but anything less than a month. I've had teams run sprints as short as 3 days, for example. What can we achieve? Why is what we're going to achieve actually really important? How does it tie up to the product goal we mentioned right at the beginning here, right? And how do we think we can achieve that as well? So we often talk about the 3 key questions of this are what, how, and why. And one of the key artifacts that we create along this is another backlog. And this backlog we call the sprint backlog because it's specific for that particular sprint. Quite detailed this often. It contains not only which of these items are going in, but often a broken down detailed plan of how to actually achieve those as well. So 2 different backlogs, important to remember. The one for the overarching endeavour is our product backlog. And then one of the key outputs of this will be the what, how and the why. And from this we can start to formulate another really important artifact, which is the sprint backlog. So just as the product backlog represents everything we're going to try and achieve for the product overall, this is specifically for that sprint, so that 2-week or so period. It's not just what we're going to achieve, but actually also a breakdown of the tasks we need to achieve it. And there's kind of a really nice alchemical moment here for me, which is when you can really see a Scrum team starting to come together. Because yes, the product owner is clearly going to need to be heavily involved in this to make sure we're selecting the most important product backlog items at the right time to pull into the sprint backlog. But it is also where our developers, used to be called the development team, but broadly, for outside of software, the people who are actually going to deliver the thing, to create the thing, this is where they're going to actually go, okay, what's a reasonable amount of that to actually get done? But also, most importantly, how are we going to do it? How are we going to work as a team to be as effective and efficient as possible to deliver all of these items that we've kind of mutually agreed have been selected into the sprint backlog? And this is the beginning of the sprint. From here, things get a little bit simpler for a while. We're now in sprint. And the whole purpose of that sprint is to take this sprint backlog and actually start to think, okay, how are we going to go from this into actually delivering what we call a product increment, or just the increment, i.e. a sliver of value-adding work that A, we could potentially think about releasing to people, but also, and probably more importantly in some ways, actually be able to get some feedback on. Along the way, things probably aren't going to go as smoothly as we imagine, even if it is only a 2-week period or so. And that's why, as we go on this journey, right, to try and deliver this product increment, we have another set of events going on that we call the daily scrum. Now, one of the things I always find fairly interesting about a daily scrum is if you've ever worked in a tightly knit team, they will kind of recreate it by themselves. If you've worked in an environment where stuff needs to get done, you will get together in the morning and talk about how we're going to help each other, what's getting in our way, how do we need to work better today, to not sort of have the same errors recreated or the same friction recreated. And that's what these are really about, helping the developers specifically kind of re-optimize for the next 24 hours ahead of them. And often the sprint backlog is a really useful input to that, because they can see whether the work's flowing as they expected, or if stuff's getting stuck, where is it getting stuck, and all this kind of good stuff. And this is also where we could start to think about introducing our third and final Scrum accountability, which for now I'm just going to place up here, right? Which is our Scrum Master, often the role that most people are familiar with. If they know anything about Scrum whatsoever, this is the one they would have heard about the most. So the reason they're a good point to introduce here, that they would have popped up earlier as well, is this is a facilitated event, just as we'd want the sprint planning to be facilitated. And so by having them involved, they just make sure that this runs smoothly, that people are being heard, that they're having the opportunity to say what they need to say. But they also make sure we're ending in action. You know, that if we have a daily scrum, we don't just identify the problems, but we've at least identified a route to overcome them, for example. It's a really tricky role to explain in detail here, but language I use around it a lot are words such as facilitator and coach are certainly key, but also mentoring people on what it means to work in a more agile way, to have that more agile mindset towards our behaviours. Cool. So, as we're going through on our tactical way with this aim to deliver the increment, hopefully we'll get there. Now, as I mentioned, the important thing about delivering this small sliver, you know, we might only have delivered this small chunk, yeah, but that's fine. The important thing, or one of the most important things for me, is then what we can do is once it's delivered, we can start to elicit some feedback from it, right? And this is a key kind of inspection moment. You're going to hear me use that word a couple more times before the end of the video. And the event where we inspect the increment is something that we call sprint review. Now, sprint review I always find is one of the more fascinating events in Scrum, because it involves more than just the Scrum team at this point. We'll have other stakeholders, particularly end users there, people who are sponsoring it, maybe compliance and regulatory people involved, looking at what we've created and giving us their feedback. Sometimes people call this a show and tell, and although that's part of it, for me, what's equally as important is that actually this is a kind of more of an asking exercise, right? Where we go, okay, this is what we thought we were going to give you, this is what we have given you, how well does that align with your expectations? And any kind of insight we'll gain from that, we can then put back into the product backlog if something needs to be working, or maybe it's generated a new idea, right? So often quite messy, quite involved, But for me, also, one of those moments when you can really see you embodying that agile mindset is that we're taking on board the feedback from these sprint reviews. Now, having done that, we have another sort of inspection cycle. And this inspection is slightly different. So whereas before we were inspecting the actual product, if you like, or the increment, yeah, this is what we call retro, sprint retrospective. Yeah. And here what we're doing is we're actually inspecting how have we performed as a whole Scrum team. So product owner, developers, Scrum Master, all there. We might have got there, we might have delivered something absolutely fantastic, but we're all absolutely fragged out. It's been really difficult, and we don't want to have another sprint that's that dramatic or that tiring. So how can we get the same results that smoothly? Or maybe we have missed something. Maybe we didn't quite deliver the right thing here, or maybe we didn't deliver everything we said we were going to do. And we want to inspect that so we can be maybe more predictable in the future or more likely to deliver the right thing the first time round. And again, thinking about all of these accountabilities and who's really stepping to the fore here, this for many Scrum Masters, and certainly when I've done the role in the past, is often their real bread and butter. This is where we start thinking, okay, how do we start to perform as a team? Yeah. So we've done one entire sprint loop now. We've got some feedback. We might have created new things off the back of sprint review. What we do now is pretty simple, and this is why we call it an iterative approach. We'll loop around again, maybe taking some more items in. Maybe some of those items are brand new, maybe some of the ones we knew before, and we'll follow this loop round. Now, there's a couple of other bits that we haven't mentioned yet. One might be quite obvious, which is, hey, you said at the beginning that you might not have this fully detailed, but we're dangerously getting close towards the stuff that you said wasn't fully detailed. You're absolutely right. And what we need to do there is make sure we're always looking ahead of it. It's actually one of the more challenging things I find to do in Scrum. It's focus on the now, the current sprint, but also keep an eye on the future. And we do this for a process called product backlog refinement. Not an event, we call it an activity at present. Some teams choose to diarise it because that works for them. Other teams do it more organically. And so it can be dropped in different places. In fact, sometimes, weirdly, it can even crop up in other Scrum events, such as sprint review. If I'm having, as a product owner, maybe a conversation with a stakeholder about feedback about what we've given, and that's generated one of those new ideas, that's actually a refinement conversation happening. So it's hard to draw it on this board perfectly. It's a little bit nebulous and can pop up anywhere. Sometimes, for example, it happens more at the beginning of the process in sprint backlog. The developers thought they were really clear on something, but just before sprint realized they need just a little bit more detail to feel confident they can deliver. And again, that's a backlog refinement conversation going on, right? So it doesn't live with anything else. So far we've got little groups of things emerging, like the accountabilities of the product owner, the Scrum Master and developers, or we've started to talk a little bit about the artifacts of the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment itself. Product backlog refinement's kind of its own thing. And talking about clustering of things, there's a couple of other bits we've missed as well, which is a newer part of Scrum that was brought together in 2020, which is something we call the commitments. We've spoke about one, which is the product goal, but there's two others. One's fairly logical. If there's a product goal for the entire product backlog and those two things live together, then we should probably have a sprint goal for the sprint backlog that just talks really clearly about what it is we think we can achieve there. So these kind of live together, right? And the product goal kind of lives with this as well. The third commitment is slightly different in nature. I often say it's a quality goal. And if you've spent any time with me, you know I tend to wax a bit lyrical about this. And this is what we call the definition of done, or the DOD, or DOD. And this is what we're saying. We're being really transparent again here about saying what we mean done is. So for example, if we were working with a digital team, we might be really clear that done means actually we have deployed to live, for example, and then all the testing and checking that's enabled us to do that. Another team might say, hey, we're not going to deploy to live as part of our sprint cycle, but we are going to have it in a light live environment with all of these tests and checks done. So it's a lot about quality, but there can also be ancillary work. You know, if there's any documents that need to be created as well as doing this, maybe a user manual or a support documentation or compliance activities, there'll often be illustrated within the definition of done to make sure that as we build each increment, because bear in mind there's going to be another one coming along in the next sprint, we're building them to the same quality, so that way we can be much more comfortable with assuring what the entire thing will look like in the future, as opposed to have some bits that are maybe to a very high quality and others that are somewhat ropier. So again, you can see it as a transparency document. And if we start to have quality issues, we can inspect, that word again, and we can adapt and find different ways forward, maybe tighten up our definition of done to make sure we don't get those quality issues in later iterations all the way around. So there's other bits to Scrum, such as the Scrum values, which we haven't covered here, and the concept of empiricism. But the framework itself, the kind of nuts and bolts, this is it, all on one board. So we've got our, just to recap one more time, we've got our 3 accountabilities, right? We've got our 5 events, right? If you're counting, you might have spotted Hal and Howie. I can only see 4, but there's kind of a hidden one, which is the sprint itself, right? Is also known as event. We've got our 3 artifacts, so the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment, and then the commitments that go along with that, which are the product goal, the sprint goal, and the definition of done. Now, if it's this simple, you know, why would you consider coming on a training course if you've just picked it up? Why would you consider maybe getting coaching support? It is simple to understand. The creators of Scrum, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, are very clear about this. It's quite hard to live. Behaviourally, having and developing that agile mindset is not the simplest thing in the world. So if you want to explore that more, that's when I'd recommend perhaps coming on one of our Scrum trainings.